So I'm going to show you, I mean, you decided, as you mentioned, you guys chose to go for Grace voltage test station on your load side for absence of voltage verification, correct? And
Yep.
then what I'm showing on the screen is the voltage indicator. That's on the blue color faceplate. That is purely for alerting on a voltage presence to just make sure the qualified worker or a task qualified technician outside the cabinet knows that there is the voltage or hazardous energy that's present on the line side as well, correct?
Right. So and the other advantage of the voltage indicator is that if they, it really will display what I refer to as an always-on available voltage. So if for some reason they actually lose an entire phase, they could actually see that as a condition right off of the voltage indicator on the display of the control cabinet with this installed. And again, when we looked at assessing how Panduit presented its product on that, we don't really have this always-on indicator of voltage or an immediate absence of that. At the end of it, it gives us a green light that says go and open the cabinet, and without the opportunity to intervene with a qualified individual test directly on the test ports on the voltage test system. But then again, the additional safety protocol of what is my line side of this cabinet doing? What's that status? That voltage indicator on that side will indeed be able to show us that voltage has been removed from the line side of the enclosure as well.
Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, the reason why I try to show this risk control hierarchy is because you mentioned the point. There's going to be some amount of residual risk that's going to exist, whatever type of control measure or mechanism you put in place. And it's up to that facility to make that determination and what is that acceptable level, correct? So kind of going back to your comment on the worker qualification and also types of using different things, not just they're going to give you an absolute zero safety, right?
Exactly.
It's more like giving you the different levels or the layers within that risk control hierarchy so that the qualified person or a task qualified person can safely understand what is going on with the cabinet and then make a determination to the defect.
Right. In fact, part of our overall qualified individual training program is we will take the individuals through pretty much what I'll refer to as a standard 4-hour, I'm going to call it classroom version of arc flash orientation. What's an arc flash? What are the 70E standards related to it? How to read a label? How to understand your personal protection equipment? And I'll call it the class lectures on running an energized work session. What makes our training unique, though, is we actually have a second body of training that's ultimately kind of a review and transition session of, okay, here's what you learned in the classroom related to arc flash and the general discussion of work practices. And here's a little more discussions of specific pieces of equipment within your facility. And then the very last segment of that is our trainer, who's also a CESCP level credential with the NFPA standard, will take and work with those individuals on a one-on-one assessment, because the 70E standard under qualified individual ultimately describes it in terms of the worker shall demonstrate proficiency as we look at key safety protocols and tasks. So when we look at how we build out a qualified individual for a company and provide them the right training, first we need to assess that training. Is it the right level of training for the right level of exposure or risk to make sure they get enough levels of training? But at the end of the day, the training says it shall be both classroom and on the job, and there shall be discussion of ultimately allowing the individual to demonstrate their personal proficiency on, frankly, the safe work practices that we're trying to build and put in place.
That's good. So, and also as I was looking back at my notes, we also had a few discussion points about you had some concerns about bringing the voltage to the door with our devices compared to other products. And then I kind of made some explanation. Do you agree with that? And because a lot of customers like you, when they come to use our products, they ask this question: am I bringing hazardous voltage to the door? Because these are mounted on the door, right? So and then we talked about the UL 61010 requirements on bringing the non-hazardous live voltage because there's impedance protector built into the device, and these devices are rated to be mounted outside the door, right?
Right. And so as they're mounted outside the door, again, we can use a qualified individual still using his test meters to do an active test, if you want to call it that. But it's much, much safer because the device itself is part of what's both giving the worker access to assessing voltage, but also doing it in a protected environment because that's what the device delivers.
Right. Yeah. And what kind of installation considerations you are taking while installing these devices? Because you're bringing the voltage to the door, I'm sure this cabinets will have some sharp edges, and also it will have the door pinches and stuff when you're looking through this. Are you taking any considerations or looking at anything to avoid that, to minimize the damage or protect these conductors from the damage?
Well, the actual hands-on installation was something I was particularly concerned about throughout all of this evaluation, and really relied on Grace and the engineering as we looked inside this cabinet and said, okay, how do we install this product? Where does it work? How are we going to successfully work with it? And what's the specifications? And we even got down into these discussions of, okay, well, this device connects up with 18-gauge wire. And I wasn't sure in the early discussion whether the wires came with the device or whether or not I had to supply those and then figure out all of that type of casing and busing and things like that. Yeah. In the end, it does make sense to secure the wires within some type of housing, if you want to call it that, a sheathing of some type on that. And indeed, we worked through all of those issues. And one of the other interesting parts of trying to land these various terminations was, would the size of the lug reduce the gapping distance between those different levels of busing and be able to more easily trigger an arc flash event to start because we've closed the gap between the original engineering busing on those. So when you look at the distances of those bus plates, you certainly wouldn't want to put two lug assemblies back to back and really close that gap with, by taking a third of that distance away. So we really spent a lot of time to say, where are we going to land our sensor wires in terms of usage and terminations and how those would work? And again, one of the good things about the Grace offering compared to the other ones we looked at is you only have half the wires because the other one requires 2 wires per phase versus 1 wire per phase.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then I also told our marketing department to just make sure they show these leads on back end of the device, so that, like the question you asked me, you thought this devices doesn't come with any kind of a wire.
Yeah, I thought it just had terminals on the back, and we grabbed a spool of 18-gauge wire and went at it from there as the first mindset. But indeed, the device does come with leads. I believe it's up to an 8-foot lead, and if for some reason you need more than that, the installation instructions were to land what do they call those? A little termination block. And the wires from the product goes to the termination block, out of the termination block, again, now with your own wiring, for whatever reason you're beyond that 8 feet, and then get out to your points of sensor as you would, install the different devices or terminations right onto where you're going to take your measurement.